All right, Albert says, I'm interested in Yiddish. Yingele Ringele says, Meryl and Chavke. Yingele Ringele was my first introduction to Yiddish literature when I took my first class. Uh, because you are awesome, Shuli. Oh, well, thank you. That's very sweet of you. I wanted to support you also because fantasy literature in English is fun, so I expect it will be doubly fun in Yiddish. Yes, it is. Moishela, I'm interested in Yiddish children's literature, so I can teach it to kids. Lily is a Yiddishist and a librarian, managing the library's sci-fi and fantasy sections. So it's good that you're interested in Yiddish fantasy and sci-fi. I'm going to, I don't know if you all got the link. I think I didn't post it in the Facebook group, but I do have a page on my website with sources. So I'm just going to type here in the chat box. I'm also going to screen share so I show you how to get to it from my website. So my website is creativeshuli.com, and I'm going to do a screen share so that you can see. So this is my website, creativeshuli.com, because my Yiddish name is Shuli and I am creative, so Creative Shuli. If you go to the tab that says Yiddish, mine and yours, then you'll find various options, one of which is Yiddish fantasy and sci-fi webinars. And from there, you can then go to April 14th, which is today, Yingele Ringele at the Sea of Reeds. So again, creativeshuli.com, go over to Yiddish, fantasy and sci-fi, Yingele Ringele. And if you click on that, then you'll get this very fancy graphic here with the, a snippet of the cover of the novel. And then a few things here. You'll find the official webinar description, which hopefully you've all seen by now. If not, it's here. And then I have the story, chapter 12 from this novel, Yingele Ringele, in the original Yiddish on the right and my own English translation on the left. This has never been translated into English, strangely enough. If somebody's looking for a good translation project, Yingele Ringele. But I did this, and actually I translated this 7 years ago in 2013 for our Passover Seder that we were hosting in our apartment in Washington Heights, New York. I divided it up into 5 sections, and at 5 different parts of the Seder, we had people read, the next part of this chapter, which was very fun. So that's that. And then at the bottom, I have some links to the original publication of the novel in 1929, Yingele Ringele, The Curious, Marvelous Tale of a Little Boy with a Little Ring. And then I have a couple of other anthologies, or as they're called, chromesty, something like that. It's a new word I just learned, which is an anthology of language, of literary excerpts for language use, for language learning. Yiddish for Anfänger, Yiddish for Beginners, includes 6 of the chapters of this book 2 years before the book was published. Kinder für den zweiten Lernjahr is a communist anthology of literature for children, which includes not this chapter, but a different chapter from Yingele Ringele. And as I'll tell you in a little bit, it was actually published very widely before it was in book form, in the form of short stories. So let me see here. It looks like we've got a few more people waiting to come in. And so once Lior is with us, great. All right, so let's get started. I'm going up to the top here of this page on my website here. And what I'd like to do is read this chapter for you in the original Yiddish. One of the things I love about this novel is how creatively it's written. There's so many internal rhymes. Even the title, Yingele Ringele, the little boy with the little ring, doesn't really do justice to the original Yiddish, Yingele Ringele. I've translated it as Lad of the Ring because I'm a nerd, so why not? It's very creative, so I want to read it for you in the original Yiddish, but you can follow along in English. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you a little bit about the author, Leon Elbe, and how this novel came to be, particularly because this was a time when there was actually a lot of pushback against the idea of Yiddish fantasy. And today, you know, in the Hasidic world in particular, there still is a lot of pushback against fantasy elements in Yiddish literature. But at the time, one of the publications that included one of these chapters actually had to include a paragraph at the end of the book justifying the inclusion of fantasy short stories in this anthology for school children. So we'll talk about that. And while I'm telling you about Elbe, we'll learn a little bit about his life that actually I think helps to make the novel make a lot more sense, why he would write it in the way that he did. So, so let's get started. Leon Elbe is actually his pen name. It's one of many pen names that he had over the course of his life. I don't think he needed a pen name because he was very famous and very much an activist in the New York Yiddish scene, though perhaps for that reason, it was, you know, he maybe didn't want to put his name on everything that he published. But his name was Leib Bassein, and Leib Bassein was born in Minsk in 1879. His father was a bass singer, so he grew up with a musical education, but primarily he grew up in Cheder, in the religious Jewish schools for children, and he was, one might say, a prodigy. He learned very, very quickly, and at a relatively young age switched over to a more advanced school with some of the older students. But in addition to Gemara, he was also very interested in secular studies, which was not something that he learned at Cheder. And it was not somebody that anybody in his shtetl really knew how to teach him. But because his family was so poor, they didn't have money to hire any tutors. So what he would do is he would go to a park in one of the cities nearby where he knew all the university students would be walking around. And he would go around with little slips of paper. He had written his name and that he was looking for a free tutor. And he would hand out these slips of paper. And so he found students who were wandering around the city park to teach him for free his secular studies. So he continued to learn in this way, and then he acquired a name for himself. Once his parents began having more kids, they needed some more money. He decided he would get a job as a tutor. So he went to a nearby village and tutored a family for a while, got free housing, free food, got paid for it. And when he came back for Pesach, right, today is Passover, so it's good to tell this story, that he came back to visit for the first time for Passover, and his family was so excited that he was going to come back with money to support the family, which is why he had gone to get this job as a home tutor anyways. But instead of coming back with money, he came back with a whole bunch of new books that he had bought with his earnings. So no money, but he had books, which gives you a sense already of his very creative, very literary personality. Around the turn of the century, around 1900, he became very involved in the revolutionary movement, was giving speeches at informal gatherings, writing pamphlets, and then of course, what's the best thing to happen for active revolutionary youth? He was drafted into the Tsar's army for 3 years, and then he left for America. And in the United States, he had no money, he didn't know English, he didn't know anybody, so he had to find some side jobs here and there. And this is when we start to get a sense of some of the socialist influences and some of the labor influences on Yingele Ringele, which I think we'll hear Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, actually gives a small lecture in this chapter that's very socialist and labor oriented. You know, when Elbe came to the United States, he saw how poorly the workers were being treated in one of the shops that he worked for. So he started petitioning for the creation of a union, and the boss fired him. So then he got a job schlepping heavy boxes, which was so difficult it almost cost him his life. So he quit that, and then he found a different job shoveling snow. And when the newspaper, the Freiheit, was founded in the sometime around 1910, I don't remember exactly what year, that was the first literary job he got. He was invited to be a regular contributor to this Yiddish newspaper, and that's when he started publishing his stories. So at this point, he's around 30 years old, starting to publish his stories in newspapers, and asked to be part of the editorial staff of several Yiddish newspapers. In the 1910s, he became involved in the American Jewish folk school movement. As a teacher, he published textbooks and literature, and this is when he became very interested in publishing children's literature in particular. During the 1920s, I think probably the biggest stepping stone to Yingele Ringele, he joined as a regular contributor to another Yiddish newspaper, and then another one, and then another one. And he began publishing a series of short stories under the name Von die kleine Kinderswegen, basically about children's childhood life. And all those stories that he published in the newspapers and the children's magazines ended up being published as a book. So he got the idea, hey, why don't I do that again? I'll write a series of stories about this kid with a magic ring called Yingele Ringele, the boy with the ring, and I'll publish them in the Sholem Aleichem Schools Kinderjournal, the children's journal of the Sholem Aleichem Schools. And the stories appeared serially over the course of 3.5 years. So one after another after another. Every story ends with a cliffhanger. What happened next, you'll find out later. But he really wanted this to be published as a novel. Unfortunately, he died before that could happen. At the age of 49, he had been sick for a very long time. But on his deathbed in the hospital, he handwrote the title page of what he hoped would be the novel Yingele Ringele, and handwrote the dedication to his children. And then after he died, a year later, it was published. So that's sort of, in short, his life. He had a fascinating life that I could spend 45 minutes talking about. But what I wanted to really emphasize in this is a couple of things. One is his socialist orientation, that he was very involved in the revolutionary movement in Russia before he came to the United States. And he was fired from jobs because he was agitating for the creation of unions. And we'll see that in this chapter. Also, his deep involvement in really launching the Yiddish children's school movement in the United States, in the Sholem Aleichem schools and in other schools, as a teacher, publishing textbooks, editing children's journals and newspapers, publishing children's stories. And so I think that also gives us a sense of what to expect in this volume, in this novel, as it really came to be. So let's actually look at it now. If we go back to my website here, I'm just gonna make sure there's nobody still waiting to come in here. Okay, yeah, we're all here. Great. So if you go to the website again, creativeshuli.com, and navigate through Yiddish fantasy Yingele Ringele, we have the story here. And I'm going to read it in Yiddish. You can follow along in English if you'd like. I should tell you first, the novel in general is about a little boy with a little ring, Yingele Ringele, who goes on all of these adventures. His dream is to go on the other side of the river and visit the king and the queen and the princes and the princesses and see everything. But along the way, he encounters biblical characters. He encounters a dragon, a spider that makes iron spider webs. He rescues giants from the trouble that they happen to be in. He becomes this sort of, wandering hero, time traveling, quasi-biblical, quasi-worldly, secular. And this chapter, he travels in time to the land of Egypt to help the Jews escape from slavery in Egypt. So before I read, I just want to highlight one passage in particular towards the end. When Yingele is talking with Moses, and Moses asks him, "What are you doing?" And Yingele says, "I'm going to visit the king in the palace." And Moshe says, "To the king in the palace? Wait a second, everyone's running away from the king and you're trying to get to him?" And Yingele says, "I don't want to go to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, but rather to a different king." And then Moshe says, and this is now bringing in the author's socialist background, Moses says to Yingele Ringele, "You shouldn't go to any king. I was once a little boy, just like you, and I lived with the king at the palace and saw all the wonderful things there. But then I went outside and I saw the Jews, a people enslaved, standing and building, working hard and bitter under the whips and beatings, molding clay and shaping bricks and building cities and palaces. From their naked bodies poured forth sweat from the labor and blood from the beatings that they got from the king's overseers. And when I saw them, this is Moses speaking, I shouted out to the slaves, 'For whom do you do all this?' 'For the king,' they answered. 'And what do you get from it?' 'Hunger and pain, beatings and death,' they replied. I no longer felt I could go to the king in the palace. I stayed with the slaves and I didn't turn away from them until the moment they were freed. And now I am leading them to another land, to a land of freedom, to the land of Israel I am taking them. Would you like to come with us?" So I'll go back now and read the whole chapter, but I wanted to highlight that because it really shows a lot of the author's own interests and personality and politics that went into this series of short stories, eventually a novel that was published in the Shalom Aleichem School Children's Journal in the 1920s in New York. So here it is. Let me just get some things out of the way here. And then I will read this for you. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to, Zoom is putting windows in the way here. Okay, here we go. So you can follow along either in Yiddish or in English. Bam Yam Suf, at the Sea of Reeds. Das Yingele mitten Ringele ist Pesach zum Zeder gewähnt bei seinen Seiden und hat gehört alle Meises von der Haggadah, wie die Jiden seinen ausgeleist geworden von Mitzrayim, wo sie seinen gewähnt Knecht bei dem König Pare und haben vor ihm gebeut ganze Städte, Pite mit Ramses, und allein haben sie gemusst wohnen in Stiebe wie Griebe. Yingele Ringele hat mit allem gleich getrunken die Arbe Käuses. 3 Käuses hat schon getrunken und hat gewartet auf den Vierten. Hat gechallischt, soll was Giche kommen schon zum 4. Kuss. Nicht, weil hat gewollt trinken noch Wein, nur weil hat gewollt sehen Eliyahu Hanavi. Wegen dem hat sich angehört als so viel gute Meises. Der Seide hat ihm doch gesagt, als zum 4. Kuss kommt Eliyahu Hanavi trinken sein Kuss, was es steht angegräht vor ihm. Hat der Pfarrer Yingele Ringele gewahrt mit Ungeduld auf den 4. Kuss. Es ist aber gewesen lang zu warten, und da es schon gewesen spät in der Nacht, hat sich dem Yingele mit dem Ringele genommen schlafen, und ist so eingeschlafen, sitzend beim Tisch. Und wie ist eingeschlafen, so hat sich ihm genommen Cholmen. Cholmt sich ihm als wegen dem, wie will gehen zum Melech im Palaz auf jener Seite Teich und sehen dort alle gute Sachen und euch kriegen das Kischepfeifele, mit welchen der Melech ruft aus die Machashefim und Machshefes von Zäuberinsel. Geht es euch das Yingele und geht, und in draußen ist schon Frühling. Als Ding schmeckt es euch am Achaie, und die Sonne scheint go helle und freiliche wie Tomit, und es blendet euch die Augen. Und wie es geht, so Yingele Ringele, es läuft ihm an entgegen a Kälbele. Auch stopp gerissen sich von Mamakus Briesten und will sich mit ihm spielen. Geht Yingele Ringele a glatt das Kälbele und macht zu dem, nein, Kälbele, Schwälbele, Itzte kann ich sich mit dir nicht spielen. Ich hab keine Zeit nicht. Ich darf gehen zum Melech im Palaz. Zurückgehendig will ich sich spielen mit dir. Ist das Kälbele weggesprungen zurück zu der Mamaku. Und Yingele Ringele ist weg weiter sein Weg. Und ist gegangen und gegangen, bis ist gekommen zum Teich, wo hat gedacht, rübergehen. und sie gehen zum Melech im Palaz. Guckt so und guckt. Erst ist gar nicht kein Teich, nur ein Jam, ein größer Jam. Und die Chwaljes warfen hin und her, als es gehabt Goran an Eime. Tracht Yingele Ringele. Wie kommt Gora her ein Jam? Als das gar kein Jam nicht gewesen, nur ein Teich. Will Yingele etwas sagen zum Jam, fragen ihn, von wann er kommt und wer er ist. Nur der Jam ist plötzlich still geworden, so wie wollte eingeschlafen. Nicht hat zu wem zu reden. Beugt sich ein Yingele Ringele und sucht auf der Erde etwas Sache, mit was so können aufwecken dem Jam. Gefindt ein Steckele, gibt eine Torke damit dem Jam und macht zu ihm, Jam, Jam, tu sich a Kerr, sag mir, von wann kommst du her? Habt sich auf der Jam von Schlaf und gibt sich ein Wurf zum Breg mit seinen Chwaljes und entfällt ab, ich bin doch der Jam Suf, Yingele Klein, Moshe Rabbeinu kommt bald zu gehen. Und Tage bald ist gekommen zu gehen, Moshe Rabbeinu, mit die 2 Strahlenhähne auf sein Stern und mit seinen Wunderstecken in Hand. Yingele Ringele hat ihm gleich erkannt, weil der Seide hat ihm noch früher erzählt von Moshe Rabbeinu und von die Wunder, die Größe, was hat bewiesen. Und gleich nach Moshe haben sich bewiesen sehr Sachmenschen. Das sind gewesen die Jiden, welche Moshe hat rausgeführt von Mitzrayim. Alle mit Steckens in die Hand und mit Klumpkes auf die Plätze, so wie Menschen, was gehen weg in einem weiten Land. Wie Moshe hat gesehen, dass Yingele mit den Ringele ständig beim Bregjam, hat zu ihm gesagt, was tust du da, Yingele? Antwortet das Yingele. Ich darf gehen zum Melech im Palaz, macht Moshe. Zum Melech im Palaz? Sehst doch, alle Leuten von Melech. Und du willst gar gehen zum Melech. Sagt das Yingele. Ich will nicht gehen zu Paare, Melech Mitzrayim, nur zu einem anderen Melech. Macht Moshe. Man darf nicht gehen zu kein Melech. Ich bin euch einmal gewesen, Yingele, wie du. Und ich bin gewesen beim Melech im Palaz und habe dort gesehen alle gute Sachen. Aber ich bin dann noch raus in Gas und habe gesehen die Jiden, ein Volk von Sklaven. Stehen und schaffen, arbeiten schwer und bitter unter Beitschen Ritter, knetten Lehm und machen Ziegel und bauen Städte und Palazen. Und von ihren nackten Leiber gießt sich Schweiß von der Arbeit und Blut von den Schmitz, was sie kriegen von dem Königsaufseher. Und als ich hab das gesehen, habe ich ausgeschrien zu den Sklaven. Für wem tut ihr das alles? Für den König, haben sie geantwortet. Und was wird ihr haben davon? Habe ich sie gefragt. Hunger und Not, Schmitz und Teut, haben sie geantwortet. Mehr habe ich schon nicht gekonnt gehen zum Melech im Palaz. Ich bin geblieben mit den Sklaven und nicht weg von sie, bis sie sind befreit geworden. Und jetzt werde ich sie das in ein anderes Land, in ein Land von Freiheit. Kein Eretz Yisrael, werde ich sie. Hey, willst du mit uns kommen? Willst du mit uns gehen? Hat das Yingele Ringele lang mitgetracht und hat geantwortet, ich gehe, warte, aber wie will man dem Jam rübergehen? Oh, ich hab vergessen, als ich hab ein Ringele. Nicht glatte Ringele, nur ein Zäuber-Ringele. Was tut für mir alles Ding in der Welt? Will ich zu ihm sagen, Ringele, Ringele, tram, tararam, führ uns rüber dem Jam. Und das Ringele wird uns schon rüberführen. Ihr werdet sehen. So lacht sich Moshe und sagt, nein, Yingele, mir darf nicht ein Ringele. Das ist mein Stecken. Nu kann mein Stecken alle Wunder tun. Ist schon einmal eine Schlange gewesen und hat eingeschlungen alle Schlangen, was Paris Kischefmacher haben euch gemacht von ihren Steckens. Und noch einmal habe ich mit dem Stecken Paris Teich geschlagen, ist von dem Wasser geworden Blut. Das habe ich sich abgerechnet mit Paaren von dem Blut von den jüdischen Kindern, was hat vergossen. Und mein Stecken hat Paaren noch Markes eingeteilt. Und jetzt will ich mit meinen Stecken spalten dem Jam. Und alle Jiden wollen können herübergehen und du euch mit uns. In der Regel hat sich der Herd eine Läuferei von Pferd und eine Klapperei von Reitwegen. Das ist Paare mit den Mitzrayim sein, gelaufen hatten wie Jeden und bringen sie zurück in Mitzrayim. Sie sollen wieder arbeiten für Paaren. Wie die Jeden haben gesehen, Paaren mit den Mitzrayim jagen sich nach sie, haben sie sich sehr erschrocken und genommen laufen, Händen, Pänden. Hat Moshe aufgehoben, sein Stecken und ein Geschrei getan zu den Jam. Läuft nicht, hat kein Meure nicht. Sie wollen euch gar nicht. Sie wollen euch gar nicht tun. Kommt noch mit mir in Jam rein. Und Moshe hat mit den Stecken gespalten dem Jam. Und die Wasseren haben sich aufgestellt wie zwei Wände von beiden Seiten. Und inmitten ist gewinnt Trucken, also wie auf der Erde. Und die Jiden sind in Riebe dem Jam, und Yingele Ringele ist mit sie euch Riebe. Paare mit den Mitzrayim haben gesehen, als die Jiden sind in Riebe dem Jam. Haben sie sich euch gelost nach sie. Sie haben gemeint, also wie die Jiden sind in Riebe dem Jam, also wollen sie euch Riebe. Aber gleich wie die Jiden sind in Riebe dem Jam, also haben sich die Wasser zurückgekehrt. Und der Jam ist geworden, wie ist gewesen. Und Paare mit den Mitzrayim, mit den Pferden und den Reitwegen sind alle ertrunken geworden im Jam. Kein einer ist nicht übergeblieben. Und die Jiden haben gesungen und Yingele Ringele euch mit sie. Tram, tararam, wir sind in Aribe dem Jam. Tram, tararam, die Säunen, sie sind der trunkenen Jam. Und dennoch sind die Jiden mit Mäuschen weg weiter. Yingele Ringele ist euch mit sie gegangen. Sind sie gegangen und gegangen, bis sie sind vergangen weit in Midbar. Ist Yingele Ringele müde geworden gehendig, hatte sich abgestellt abruhen. Gar nicht gesehen, wie Yingele Ringele ist geblieben stehen von hinten. Yingele Ringele hat gemeint, wird sich abruhen ein bisschen und gehen weiter und anjagen die Jeden. Aber ist gewinn sehr ausgemattet. Und da hat sich ihm noch verwollt Trunk. Und da ist doch ein Midbar. Und kein Wasser ist so viele auf der Vier nicht. Hat es schon gewollt beten, sein Ringele soll ihm helfen, aber da hat sich bewiesen ein alter Mann mit der Kosswein in Hand und Yingele Ringele hat gleich erkannt, als das ist Eliyahu Hanavi. Na, trink mein Kind, hat Eliyahu Hanavi gesagt zu Yingele Ringele und ihm zugerückt dem Kosswein zu den Lippen. Yingele Ringele hat sich gleich aufgehabt und gesehen, als der Seide steht über ihm und rückt ihm zu die Lippen ein Koss mit Wein und sagt zu ihm, na, trink den fertigen Koss. Yingele Ringele hat die erste Sache gefragt, sie Eliyahu Hanavi ist schon gewähnt trinken sein Koss. Und der Seide hat mit der Schmeichel geantwortet, warte gewähnt. Und hat von dir übergelassen, ein Säckele Nis euch zu spielen. Und der Seide hat gegeben dem Yingele mit dem Ringele ein Säckele Nis. Und Yingele Ringele ist weg mit Tate Mama schlafen. Nur was ist weiter gewesen, wird ihr später sehen. So that's Yingele Ringele. And I just heard a ding that somebody else was coming in here. So I'm going to see if I can see the list of people who are here. Zoom is, here we go. Can I see all right, I think I'm gonna have to stop the screen share. Yes, now I can see the participants. I'm gonna let Joe in here. All right, so We've got about 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to open this up for questions and answers. But before we do that, I want to just show you a couple more things here. So one thing that I want to show you is the author's handwriting. He handwrote, as I said, the cover of the book on his deathbed in the hospital. And it was then published as a facsimile in the front of the book. So of the million different things open on my computer, I'm going to find this and I'm going to screen share. Here we go. So you should be able to see Yingele Ringele, Die Chikave Wunderliche Geschichte. This is in a long tradition of super long subtitles. This is, if you haven't seen old books before, you might not be used to this. But this is Yingele Ringele, the curious, wonderful tale of a little boy with a little ring. Was is ausgewein, wo nur Heck und wo die Welt hat ein Eck, who was able to go and travel everywhere in the world, in every possible place. Die Chadushim, was hat gesehen, the surprises that he discovered, was und was mit dem ist geschehen, and all the different things that happened to him. Geht für alle Kinder, good for all children, a viele für Große, even for the big kids, this book is good. Nicht nur für Kleine, worin die meiste is als eins a schöne. Not just for the little kids, because the story is very, very nice. Von Leon Elbe. And then this was in the front of the book. There's some pictures of him. But then the title page, that was all typed out here in this very nice upside down pyramid format by Leon Elbe, illustrated by Aaron Goldman and published by Matonis. Literally Presence is the name of the publisher that gave this out. Here's some pictures of him at various points in his life: 1912, 1895, 1898. But what I really wanted to show you, aside from this, I'm going to stop my screen share so that I can find the other thing, which is really, really cool. So this, I mentioned earlier that there was a lot of pushback against the idea of having Yiddish fantasy stories for children. There was a lot of pushback against that, and that in one of the anthologies that included these chapters, there was a notice at the end of the book justifying the decision to include some fantasy stories in this anthology for children. So I'm just opening it up now so that I can show you a poor verte to die letter. Here it is. So let me go back here and screen share. And this I have in my Scrivener share. Okay. So I'm going to make this a little bigger. This is a note from the editors for teachers who would be using this anthology with their kids. This was published a few years before Yingele Ringele came out as a novel, but it included 6 of the stories from Yingele Ringele in it. And at some point, they say, "Wir halten, as der fantastische Element in Mises is nicht schädlich für die Kinder," which means we believe that the fantastic element in stories is not going to injure our children. It's not bad for the children. Die ruhige reale Welt is ein groß Wunder für Kinder. The outside world, the real world of reality, is a great wonder for children. Und die Meise is a Fortsetzung von der kindischen Wirklichkeit. So stories that are fantasy stories, there's actually a translation of what for children is reality. Wir haben sich a viele nicht erschrocken, Rachmana litzlan, von Malachim und Prinzen und einige Meises. So we weren't even afraid of, heaven protect us. We weren't even afraid to include stories about angels and princes. There's a Brother Grimm story in this volume. Ob de dozige Lane Material is kinstlisch heißt es hat der tierischen Wert. So if the reading material is artistic, then it will be very attractive and therefore it will have a value. Um, so, you know, nowadays there's lots of fantasy literature out there. Yingele Ringele was really one of the first original Yiddish novels, fantasy novels, and in part had to be published with this disclaimer to convince people that yes, it's actually safe for children to read fantasy. And even now, the world of Yiddish fantasy literature isn't so well known. And what people do know tends to be Peretz, Sholem Aleichem, Isaac Bashevis Zinger, you know, the big names. But I think that's mostly because people are interested in the big names. But when you start looking for the fantasy stuff and the sci-fi in Yiddish literature, you uncover these names that have sort of been forgotten, like Leon Elbe, or his real name, Lebe Bassain. You come across, you know, these small writers that nobody really thinks about today, but they've got really great material that are really worth looking into. So, so that's what I've got for you, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm happy now to take some questions in the chat box for the next 10, 15 minutes. So if you have any questions or if you have any comments, anything you want to add to the discussion, feel free to put that in the chat box as well. I'm here to learn from all of you as well. It's not just all of you who can learn from me. I can learn from you, and I'm really excited about that. So, all right. So Lilia asks, is most of the Yiddish fantasy lit you've encountered for children? And the answer is yes. A lot of what I've encountered have been translations, actually, of Hans Christian Andersen stories, translations of the Brothers Grimm stories, and translations of other classics. I guess we wouldn't really call Treasure Island fantasy in the sense of dragons, but you know, it's this pirate story, hunting after treasure, was published in Yiddish. And then you get a lot of these stories, like the stories from Yingele Ringele, that were published in the children's journals through the Sholem Aleichem School and other children's journals. Not only Yingele Ringele, but there were also translations of Brother Grimm's stories and other fantasy short stories that were published there. Recently, the Yiddish fantasy and sci-fi that I've encountered, there isn't really all that much of it. A lot of it is published for kids, though also for older children. There's recently been translations of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit into Yiddish. Harry Potter just came out in Yiddish. Publisher in Sweden, the Omniansky Text publisher, has published a book that's a guide to magical creatures in Yiddish. But then you also have in the Vorwärts, there's a Yiddish sci-fi erotica short story, which is definitely not for children. So you have some of that, but yes, mostly I think for children is what I've been finding. Daniel Baker says, such an interesting lecture. I'm interested to hear about the boundaries of, quote, fantasy in Yiddish literature. To me, this text doesn't fit my sense of what fantasy is. It's more folklorish. Is there a clear line between fantasy and folktale? Yes. So if I wanted you to experience the fantasy really of Yingele Ringele, I would have chosen other chapters. This chapter happens to be one of the least fantastical chapters in the book, but because it's Passover, I wanted to share the Passover chapter with you. But the book is full of magic, the child using his magic ring to create all sorts of wonders and miracles to help him on his quest. He encounters a dragon, he encounters a spider with a web, giants, all sorts of things, bodies of water, and really ship out from quite a lot of fantasy things in here. And certainly in the translations of world literature, we find a lot of that as well. In terms of other fantasy literature in Yiddish, I would have to really give it some thought. But you know, I think there's sort of two kinds of fantasy in Yiddish. There's the specifically Jewish fantasy that I think most people know about, which is golems and Dybbuk's and those sorts of things, and the various shadim, the demons. But then there's also a lot of, as I mentioned in my webinar last week, there are also a lot of stories and passages within stories that involve dragons and unicorns and giants and fairies and goblins and these other creatures from more generally Slavic and more generally European fantasy lore. So they both exist, but it's definitely something that needs more research that I think more people should be exploring. All right, Albert, I found this very interesting and I want to stay connected to what you are doing. It inspires me to learn. I'm so happy to read that. I'm really, really glad. If you go to my website, you can contact me and send me an email and I can add you to my email list. If you have the new Harry Potter translation, I also run some reading groups online. We're reading through Harry Potter in Yiddish together. But certainly if you send me an email, I'll add you to an email list and send you updates. So I'm really glad you're excited by this. Miriel and Chavka from Chavka. My mother grew up in the Hasidic shtetl of Rimanov in Poland and was admonished by her teachers not to see the film Dybbuk in the mid-1930s. She did go to see it in the kino, and the teacher ended up conferencing with my bubby as a result. My mom spoke about how this was the only time she, quote, disobeyed since she was an excellent student. Yeah, I went to an interesting conference a few years ago at Rutgers University about Jewish life in Poland in the early 20th century. And somebody gave this really interesting presentation about the Beis Yaakov school system, which was this school system for Jewish girls that was established, I think, in the 1910s, maybe a few years before that, with the goal of giving Jewish girls a Jewish religious education, in some ways, just as the boys were getting in cheder and in yeshiva. And we have this, I think, very nostalgic, very singular vision of what the old world was like, that in these religious communities, people were very backwards, they were very opposed to the modern world, they didn't engage in secular culture. But at this conference on Polish Jewish culture, somebody gave this very interesting presentation about the theater program in the Beis Yaakov schools and how the theater program was the main attraction for parents to send their kids to the Beis Yaakov schools and for the children to want to go to the Beis Yaakov schools. And because it was all girls, the girls would all be cross-dressing in the plays, and they would be doing all sorts of things in the plays that, you wouldn't necessarily expect these, religious girls from the shtetl to be doing in 1920s, 1930s Poland. But they were. And I think that's important to realize when we think about, the backlash against things like this, the backlash against the Dybbuk, the backlash against a lot of Yiddish theater, against fantasy. There were a lot of kids who were really into it and a lot of adults who were really into it too. So yes, let's go on here. Fragel, we missed a bunch of what you said. There was feedback from someone unmuted. This, by the way, is being recorded. So I'm going to, if you'd like, I'll share the recording so that you can hear what you missed from the beginning. And again, also, if you go to my website, creativeshuli.com, you can contact me, send me an email, and I'll be happy to be in touch with you. From German, this short story is an excellent way to learn and improve the Yiddish language. Thanks. Are there other short stories like these for intermediate Yiddish speakers? So if you go again to my website, to the page about that we were just using for Yingele Ringele, at the very bottom, I included links to a couple of anthologies of Yiddish literature that were specifically made for Yiddish students in the 1920s, including chapters from this book, but also many other things. And I think that would be a great way to find some easy literature. And also, if you send me an email, again, I'd be very happy to share more with you. Why were fantasy stories considered bad at that time? Because it was worldly, it wasn't Jewish, it was Goyish, it was what the Goyim were doing. It was a waste of time. And we can talk more about that. So I think we should wrap up soon. But I know that Jana, who is the sponsor of this program, is just joining now, and I know she had wanted to say a few things to all of you as well. So as soon as she joins here, I'm going to hand things over. Jana, why don't you take the floor here, and you can share with us what you'd like to tell us all. If you're here. Let me see. Okay, Jana, I'm going to unmute you.
Yes.
Okay, now we hear you.
Yes, sorry. I think something happened with my computer. So I wrote a long message to everybody.
Oh, okay. Would you like to say something now as well, or would you like to just have everybody read what you wrote?
No, it's okay. I would like to thank you very much for the class, and I love the Passover connection. I think it's amazing. And I love the style you're reading in. It's just a mechaya to listen to you. And I would like to also tell you all about our new activities. I hope Samantha will teach for us again. It's up to you to decide. And other activities are intermediate class, so Yiddish for intermediate students that start tomorrow. So if you're interested, please let me know. And we were starting a new series, interviews with celebrities, with Yiddish celebrities. So we will be interviewing various Yiddish stars, actors, performers, writers. So it's going to be fun. If you want to join us, let us know. And also, if you would like to say thank you to Samantha and donate for this class, I will send a link. And when you donate, please mention her in the comment for the donation, so we would know which lecturer gets what. Otherwise, it's a mishmash. Nobody knows who gets what. So thank you very much.
And you can follow on Facebook. There are so many letters in this acronym. I always have to make sure I get it right. The YAAANA with 3 A's in it is the Yiddish Arts and Academics Association of North America.
Exactly, very long name.
Yes, so you can follow on Facebook. They do Yiddish yoga, and they do Yiddish music, and all sorts of things that are available in this time when a lot of us have a lot of free time at home. A lot of us, like me, don't have free time because we're working full time while also parenting young children. But those of you who do have time, there's a lot of great programming going on through Jana. So, all right, there's a couple more questions here. I think that I'll respond just very briefly. Daniel asks, he says, in English fantasy literature, especially for teens and adults, there's overtly queer elements, like in the Twilight series. Is there anything similar in Yiddish literature? There are some things. I'm having trouble at the moment thinking specifically of which, but I know I have encountered that. That's something that I think perhaps I can look into, and who knows, maybe there'll be a future webinar about that. But as many people know, Yiddish has become very, very popular within the LGBT world and among queer Jews for many, many reasons. And that could also be another lecture of its own. And so I find it hard to believe that there aren't new things being written today for that audience. But I'll give it some thought, and I'll get back to you on that. One other thing from Leora Madison, interesting, I heard even in the English-speaking world, there was an aversion to fantasy for a while. Diane Wynne-Jones wrote that she was forbidden from reading fantasy literature as a child. That's great. I didn't know about that. I mean, I know that there's always been aversion to fantasy within various cultures, particularly within religious cultures. Harry Potter was not well received in Russia. For example, there was a huge campaign against Harry Potter for being too magical and too blasphemous, as it were. There was also an attempt to push back for the same reasons against Harry Potter in the United States. Wasn't quite nearly as successful. In England, wasn't quite nearly as successful. Yes, Lior adds, God of Vengeance is a well-known play with lesbian characters. And there's certainly a lot of literature that we could call queer Yiddish literature. But whether it has fantasy elements or sci-fi elements or not, that's something I think which is more of an unknown question. Great. All right. Any other last minute questions before we go? Otherwise, feel free to email me. Yes,
a
Jana.
comment regarding LGBT terminology and LGBT world in Yiddish land, imaginary Yiddish land. I was, before all the classes went on Zoom, I was thinking about having an event like that as a part of the Pride Parade weekend. So if you would be interested, we could do it. I mean, I don't know if it would be good timing for you, but.
Sure, happy to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if there are more people who are interested in this topic, please let us know as well, so we would know when to organize it and how.
Yes, and I also happen to be friends with somebody who a few years ago put together a whole list of queer terminology in Yiddish that wasn't in the dictionary, and actually invented a lot of new language to talk about these ideas and concepts that previously we didn't necessarily have the words to talk about. So if anybody's interested in that as well, I'm happy to share with you my friend's work, and certainly I'll talk with Jana about possibly doing something through this organization as well. All right. Well, Aziz and Pesach Allah, have a sweet Passover, depending on your custom, either one more day or 2 more days. And I hope to see you all again soon. Seid gesund.